Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this Ask Alumni Live session as part of the Alumni Career Compass events at the University of Melbourne. This Career Compass series aims to demonstrate some of the benefits of the university alumni community, and especially by giving recent graduates access to alumni who can share their insights and advice based on their career journeys. My name's Carl Brown. I'm one of the alumni relations managers here at the university. And it's my pleasure to be joined online this evening by Alumni Katherine Leong. Hi, Katherine.
Hey, everyone.
So Katherine completed a Bachelor of Commerce, Bachelor of Science at the University of Melbourne in 2001 and then proceeded to work for roughly 8 years, starting with KPMG, then Ernst & Young, and then SunGard. She then moved to NAB, where she worked for the next 8 years, during which time she progressed from the role of Group Planning Senior Analyst through to Associate Director responsible for capital markets and advisory. Also during her time at NAB, Katherine completed a graduate certificate in social impact at Melbourne Business School in 2013. And it seems that had an effect on Katherine's career, as her subsequent roles have focused on social innovation and sustainable finance. Currently working as an impact strategist for Spark Beyond, a company with a rather grand aim to help to solve some of the world's most complex and pressing challenges. So first of all, thank you for joining us this evening, Katherine. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Carl.
So firstly, can you just give us a brief description of your career journey and your current role, please?
I found it really fascinating the way you described my career, because you actually broke it into two halves, and that's pretty much how I see it as well. It's almost been working for 20 years, but it's kind of broken 50-50, and there's a really good reason for that. In 2008, there was the GFC, and I can point to that time as a personal, moment of crisis in my career. Some might call it a quarter life, just after a quarter life crisis, which I hear a lot of people are going through these days, to actually think about what I wanted to do with my career. And that's really the start of the journey for me. So I did finish a biochemistry degree at Melbourne University, hoping I would end up in science and biomedical science at that, research in particular. And I just realised that I needed a bit of a change, and I moved into business. So I got my chartered accountancy qualification at KPMG, and as soon as I qualified, I was off to London, just like every Australian does. So I spent my next phase of my work with EY and SunGard travelling around Europe Monday to Friday, and then travelling on the weekend. So it was a really great way of seeing the world, and it really gave me some great opportunities to go across different industries, because I was in transaction support, or some might call it sort of mergers and acquisitions, buy-side, sell-side due diligence. Really good way of cutting it, but I also was quite generic. I've always been a generalist, never really specialised into a certain sector. That's very much driven my career, and it comes to play out in Spark Beyond, so I'll get to that in a sec. But the GFC was really a defining moment, to be honest. It happened while I was in Canary Wharf, and I saw that day that Lehman Brothers people left the building with their cardboard boxes, and it just shocked me to my core. I was like, we were working long hours, and I'm sure some of you are doing that now, and wondering, what am I doing with my career? What am I doing with my life? Do I believe in capitalism as it stands? And so it came down to a bit of, reflections about my values and what I wanted to do, and how I aligned everything I do, including my job, to that. So I spent, after a bit of a time moving into corporate restructuring and then project managing at SunGard, to take 9 months off to travel and try and find what that might be. I tried skill volunteering in India at an NGO, and I was bitterly disappointed by that experience, I would say. It really shaped where I went after that. I decided that sector was not really one that I understood. So I ended up going back to corporate because I spoke that language, and I came back and did my research in Melbourne, and I came back for family reasons. NAB has the most amazing microfinance program, $130 million set aside to work with Good Shepherd Microfinance to provide no interest loans to Australians. It's phenomenal. No one really knows about it. It's amazing. So I joined in a finance role to get to that team. That was my only reason for joining NAB. And I think I told my manager that about a month in after I got the job. But I'd already started that path. So it was interesting, Carl, that you sort of reflected on the study I did at Melbourne Business School. I actually did my research while I was travelling through South America and India and Nepal and Bhutan to say I want to do some study to help me make that transition. And I came across this graduate certificate for social impact, which was exactly what I needed to provide some structure to my knowledge of what was happening in that space so that I could actually transition. I think some of the questions you've asked are around that, but thinking ahead and actually putting in place some additional study is, I think, quite important and, worth considering if you are trying to make a transition. So I ended up getting a gig that allowed me to find that microfinance team. I volunteered for them internally. They were doing a project to create a business called Speckle, which is now released as Speckle, but at the time it had no name. And I convinced the manager of that team that I think impact investment was the most important thing that the bank should be looking at. And they created a role for me. So that became one of the first of 3 roles I got created for me. And I got to make up my own title. I was saying to Carl, I really don't care about titles. I'm trying to find the most audacious title ever and have that. So one of my colleagues is what does he call himself? A data evangelist. So I'm going to try and top that. So I guess that's where I had the most amazing time in that role. I had 6 years looking at impact investment, trying to grow the market in Australia. And I can talk about that. I might answer it through some questions later on. But what is impact investment? How does capitalism and the need to bring that triple bottom line of social and environmental accountability to bear? And for me, that spoke a language that I understood and also aligned to the values that I believed in. So it really was a worthy use of my time, and I had an amazing time at NAB building it from an idea into a market. Just in terms, someone asked about market size. I'll tell you a story later actually about market size. I'll hold that thought. But it came to be that I came across this organisation called Spark Beyond, Israeli company, and it's an artificial intelligence. But the mission, as Carl said, is to influence planetary scale impact. Now that's exactly the type of language I like. I was pretty excited when they decided to open their 4th regional hub in Melbourne, and I jumped ship. It was also a good time for it because the work I do, and I was doing at NAB, really didn't have a place in a bank that really had a lot of problems going into a Royal Commission, coming out of a Royal Commission around compliance and regulation. So there's a timing element to your career as well that you need to consider. When is the right time for you to be in those organisations, and can you do what you want to do at the right time and right place? I might pause there and maybe go to another question, and I can pick up the threads of this story through those questions, Carl.
Sure, okay. You mentioned kind of working overseas in various different areas. How has that played an impact in your work and your career? Like, what has that brought to your career that you maybe didn't expect when you first were starting out?
Australia's a pretty small pond, so it's pretty important to get out there and actually connect to seeing what's happening in the big global markets, the Americas, the dragons of Asia, and also in EMEA. So I think it brought a level of perspective because we sometimes get a bit self-absorbed in our own companies and our own market. Our market is basically, if you think about the ASX 10, it's 4 banks, 2 retailers, 2 telcos, and a bunch of mining companies. It's not a hugely innovative and diverse market. So in terms of market cap anyway. So I think it's super critical to broaden our experiences and go overseas and see what's happening in other markets and bring those ideas back. I mean, we have some great ideas here, but I think, the fun thing is to go see what's working in other parts of the world. And that's really the hub of innovation. And I guess that's really where I play now in innovation. So sharing ideas and bringing them into the context of Australia is really fun. And I think having that perspective requires travel.
Sure. And a couple of people who've asked in advance, what would a day in the life of an impact strategist actually look like? What's your
That's a really good question, because I was just saying I had a pretty busy week last week. I had one of the executives and co-founders of Spark Beyond in Australia from Israel. And I'll tell you about one day we had. We went from a bank, a big bank, talking about implementation of using artificial intelligence for fraud, credit risk analysis, and even things like product development, all the way through to talking about a sporting league and how they can actually use artificial intelligence to increase participation of that sport and increase the viewership of that sport, through to a university which has commercialized research and is looking to scale it. And the way the type of research they were doing was around mosquitoes. So how do you actually breed enough mosquitoes to stop the spread of dengue fever and Zika? It was phenomenally interesting. And it all ties back to data and how we use technology to give them information, to use that data in a different way. So an impact strategist is basically, I guess in a nutshell, connecting dots, looking at across different sectors and seeing opportunities to use tools. I used to do it at a bank using finance as a tool, and now I'm in a technology company using artificial intelligence as a tool to influence change.
Great, okay. And another question that kind of ties into this, what sort of soft skills and hard skills do you think you need for a career in this sort of area?
To do innovation and change, you need a few things. Firstly, I think it's important in terms of hard skills. I think less and less hard skills are more important, but you need a ground in something. You need to know something that you can provide value, whether that be law or engineering or something. Like, you need to be able to add value somewhere. So my recommendation is whatever you're interested or studied, because I know you're sort of alumni, so you've already been through your course, use that as a leveling point. I'll give you an example. My husband is actually a lawyer who actually codes on weekends, right? So he should have done computer science and engineering. However, he did finance and law. He didn't have a lot of choices. That's the two choices that his family had. I could probably go into some jokes there, but that's probably not appropriate at this stage. So anyway, he chose law, and he's taken a long time, but he's somehow managed to get himself into law tech. So now he brings the technology into the law space, and he's head of legal at one of the big four banks, and he's bringing tech to, I guess, revolutionise the operations of legal functions of one of the big banks. So I think that there is always an intersection that allows you to use that hard skill, whatever you've learned, to bring it to what you want to do. Then in terms of soft skills, I think more and more prevalent is this concept of EQ and concept of AQ, the adaptability quotient. Now, you guys are pretty familiar with the fact that there's a lot of change coming about. They're saying now that most people have 7 different careers in their lifetime. My parents probably only had 2, that type of stuff of generational change. So adaptability is really important. And I think there's some soft skills that come with that, which is being really resilient. I can tell you, jumping into a sector that I knew nothing about practically. Well, I thought I knew something about, clearly didn't know much about it until I got into the artificial intelligence world. But it's been a massive learning curve, and I've had to be very adaptable and, I guess, vulnerable. I share this with you because it was hard. It was probably the hardest thing I've ever done in my whole career. But it was, I sit here now and I think I've been through that, and now I can use this year to leverage off to bring it together with the impact investment world. So it's about what you want to do and how you actually take the opportunities that present. I didn't want to go through this year, but it happened. So you take, I guess, the learning opportunities you have. So resilience is one. Communication's super important. Being able to listen and understand what people want and what you want, and being able to communicate that well is really important. A lot of EQ skills, how to work with people, because as technology comes about, more and more of the roles are going to be around the people part, because a lot of the knowledge-based roles are going to be automated. There's no question. I can see it. I mean, one of the jobs we're doing at the moment is looking at due diligence. It's what I did in London, right? Buy-side, sell-side due diligence. And we're now using artificial intelligence to shorten that cycle. And it's phenomenal to be and having a look at what technology can do to take out those bloody hours I did in London. They can now be automated. So it's starting to come about, and change is happening fast. So you just being able to be as flexible as you can and remembering what you want. I think there's a lot of soft skills about understanding who you are and what you need. So mental health, physical health, those things, and family are so important as grounding. And I can't stress that enough in your career. We're talking about career now, but a balance of, or being acknowledging the other parts of your life is really important. In fact, I think I won't use the word work-life balance because I don't believe that exists. I can debate this with anyone, but I think there's acknowledgement of the different parts of your life and being able to see that. And I actually think that it's blending. So you'll see a lot of, if you see my LinkedIn profile, a lot of what I'm personally interested in now blends into my work. It's a bit of a grey space, which is challenging in its own right.
Sure. And you've touched on challenges a bit, so that kind of brings us into a couple of questions that have come through around what are the kind of big challenges that you've overcome in your career journey, and what advice can you draw from those?
Yeah, I think, again, it's sort of in 2 phases. I think the first phase of my career, the learning was that to challenge and take ownership for your career. I think, I don't know how many people sleepwalk the first part of their career. I went from high school to uni without even blinking because it was just the norm, and uni into a chartered accountancy firm because as a graduate you were looking for those big brand names to put on your CV, which is like a totally acceptable pathway, mind you, but without having consideration of that, I think sometimes we miss a trick because maybe that isn't always the best path for some of us. And being aware of that and taking a divergent path actually gives you different opportunities in your career. So I think the first part of my career was really about challenging the status quo and actually being woke enough to sort of just say, is this actually what I want, as opposed to what everyone does? And then the second half is really about challenges. I guess, I mean, there's quite a few. I think of it as a Venn diagram of like what I'm good at, what I want to do and see in the world, and what the companies that I work for need. And if you can find that sweet spot in the middle, then that's a good place to be. But it takes a while to work that out of like, you know, what you're good at and what you bring to the table. And I think that's been my biggest challenge, trying to test and learn and try test and learn. I mean, you talk about innovation and the fail fast sort of thing. Test everything, you know, just try stuff and see if it works. And if it doesn't work, then, you know, it's okay. No one's going to judge you for stepping out of a job in 6 months if it's not the right thing. If you know, you don't have the right skill sets. One of the things I'll tell you, hopefully, I mean, this is getting recorded, so everyone's going to hear this, but I'd say the role I've just taken, perhaps what I signed up for didn't eventuate. It didn't play out the way this startup or this scale-up company envisaged, and that I took the job based on knowing a piece of information. It didn't happen. So I guess we were both kind of in a bind because we were like, okay, what are we going to do? And I think that lesson of saying, was it okay to walk away? Yes, it would have been okay. But could we try and make it work? Yes. And were both parties willing to make it work? Yes. So here we are a year later and it's probably going to be okay now. But it's, you know, being bold enough to have those hard conversations and say if it's working or not working, and being really honest. My manager sent me a note on the weekend saying, you're exemplary at being vulnerable. When I have a problem, I now tell people because I don't think there's any point in hiding it if it's not working out, just to say it. So I think I've faced the challenges by just being really honest as best I can with what I know and saying, I don't know if I know this, so can you help me? And I guess that's how I built my network of people. I don't need to know anything. As long as I know someone in my network who does it, I'm good.
Absolutely. And I guess that kind of answers one of our other questions, which is around how important do you think networking is in terms of developing your career and advancing from role to role? Have you had good experience in building your career through your network?
Oh, absolutely. My network is my support. It's my tribe. I love working with these people, even if I've never actually worked with them technically in a job. But I think maybe I'll define network because a lot of people, when I started working, network was like those really weird drinks that you go to and you actually go meet someone with the drinks and then you kind of switch business cards and like be on network. I don't really get that. Yes, you go to drinks and you meet people, but that sort of very corporatized sort of way of networking of just having a name of someone, I think has moved on. I think when I think about networks, I think of them as people who I guess are aligned to a similar vision that I have. And it transcends jobs, it transcends companies. It's about what are people trying to do and does that align to what I'm trying to do? And then whatever job or career or company we work for will stay in that same network because we're still trying to do the same sort of thing. My network is quite diverse because I like people. And I think I love people who are trying to do something audacious. That's actually my favourite type of person. And so I invest in those people and I try and help them move on. And as a result, they will pay that back in kind and they will help me do something like totally ridiculous that doesn't even seem like it's feasible. And they will lend their support through either connecting to other people, acting as a sounding board, brainstorming ideas. There's so many different ways people help each other and it's a community. So the network for me is a community. So yes, it is super critical in what I do. It's also super critical for how, even if it's not my career, my family has a very strong network, the school community in which my kids go to. There's lots of communities. So I think, networks is, I guess, just another word for community. If you have your tribe, invest in it. Make sure you spend time in that tribe because they help you get to where you want to go. There's a really wonderful African proverb. It says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I totally subscribe to that because some of the problems we're facing in the world, such as climate change and some of the housing challenges that I did at NAB and some of the things we're tackling at Spark Beyond require a collective impact approach of multiple people to collaborate. And so if one person could have solved it, it would have been solved. It's just clearly evident these are really complex, wicked problems and they require collaboration. So that's the type of work I like to do, and that's why a network, community, tribe is so important.
Sure. And I think there's a really great point that you raised there, that networking isn't just one activity. It doesn't take just one form. There are a whole range of ways in which a network can be found, can be utilized and can be leveraged off of. So yeah, that's really great advice there. I wonder if I can also come back to something that you talked about in one of your last answers when you were describing your Venn diagram of what you think your skills are, what companies you've worked for, what they need, and where you think you can place yourself. Obviously, a lot of our graduates finish their degrees in whatever discipline they're in and then go out into the career world and try and find a way to apply their skills that works for them, works for the companies that they're connecting with. What advice would you give to alumni who are thinking about creative ways to apply their skills? You've obviously had a bit of a journey through that yourself. So I wonder if you can reflect on that for our participants.
So Carl, I'm going to be really upfront with you guys. Nothing I've said is like my own IP. There's a thing called the Akagi diagram. It's a Japanese diagram which actually has that sort of diagram. It's a really good Venn diagram and I recommend you look it up. I'll send the link to Kyle later so you can share it. So creative ways of getting involved. I guess, I said I went traveling and I do a lot of soul searching. I think there's a piece of work that you got to do on yourself, to be honest. You've got to understand. I had to go this journey, and my experiences when I speak to people in my network, there's a lot of work on understanding what you care about in the world and what you want to do with the time that you have available. And once you kind of understand that, it makes it a lot easier to work out how to blend your career with that. Right? So that's kind of step one. And some people know that already. Some people spend years working it out. I met lots of people who have just retired of, a 50-year career and still are working through it. So I think, sometimes it hits you. I had a moment, in the GSC, some people have personal issues that create that moment for them. So I think that's step one. Try and understand what gets you excited and what you find enjoyable and it doesn't feel like work. When you're in the flow, there's a book called Flow, actually, and I really resonate with that because when you are in deep work, you don't feel like it's work because it's just so easy. And if you can find whatever that type of thing is for you, that's probably a good indicator of where you should take your career. Then it's like, what do you do well and how can you use that to help someone else in that space? And so I described, because I'm an accountant, so I started by helping them do forecast models for this for Speckle. You can look up Speckle and please tell everyone about Speckle. It's basically an amazing social enterprise created to take on payday lending. It's quite phenomenal, and it's been literally a 13-year journey of someone who's one of my inspirational mentors. So taking that first step of understanding what your skills are and then saying, how can I contribute that back in and help someone and then keep working on it. So I mentioned that things like studying, I'll sort of referred to my time at MBS, doing some study, understanding, building a network there, people who are also on that journey of trying to find their career transition and then going through that journey with them as they're trying to move into their own social impact or I guess purpose-led roles through their skills. And I guess it's just one step at a time. It's a marathon, isn't it? It's your life. So sometimes it comes fast, sometimes it's slow and hard and frustratingly annoying because you can't get to where you want to go because no one trusts you and you don't know how to do it. But I think if you are curious enough, you'll keep bumping into those networks and finally get there. So I think there's I hope that's answered the question. I kind of forgot what the question was, to be honest.
It was about how to apply your skills in
skill volunteering. That's a great way. Start there. Skill volunteering. Yeah. Volunteering generally, like go and volunteer in your personal life and see what you like doing and get involved. Get going, get started, do something. Doing something is better than nothing. Don't talk about it. Action.
Absolutely. That's great advice that we hope our alumni will take as well. You mentioned that you came back to the university more recently and did the graduate certificate in social impact. One of our participants asked, what value did you receive from that? And I'm also interested, connected to that, to know whether that was an intentional pivot point in your career or whether that was something, what motivated that study?
So something you need to know about me. I am quite risk adverse because I'm a chartered accountant. I wear the black hat a lot. So I wasn't about to jump into a new career without actually doing my research. So the study was kind of like my research into what this field would look like. I could do my own reading, and I had been, but doing some study meant that it was structured. And there was a people, a class of people debating these topics. So you actually sat in these ideas and like grew with a group of people. And it was an interesting course because it was like people from government, not-for-profit and corporate. And as you know, I came from a corporate world. So having those different perspectives really challenged my thinking, and I learned a lot from that. So I think that network was important to meet different people from all in the same point in their careers looking for a change, but from different backgrounds was interesting. The structured reading was fascinating for me and learning, it was only, it was a 4-module course. It wasn't hugely long because I was thinking about doing a master's, but I didn't need to at the end of the day because ultimately I only needed to do this to help give me enough confidence to then go and ask for that role that I wanted to ask for in the bank. So that's the reason I did it, and it was really valuable from that perspective because it gave me the confidence to know that I knew as much as most people in the world, and it was enough for me to leap off and feel confident that I understood at least the philosophy behind why we have social impact. And we studied philanthropy and we studied this, the reasons corporates exist in the first place, and these are all fascinating topics that were really relevant to where my career went to after.
Great. So there was an element of kind of personal benchmarking within all of that you were doing, which sounds like a good stock take in some ways.
I think we should all do audits of our own careers every year. Do an audit of your career. What are you learning? Where do you want to go? I think it's really important. Your career is it's just like any element of your life. If you sign up for the gym and you take these, you sign up and do a marathon, it's just the same thing. You just got to take ownership for where you want to shape it and where you want it to go to.
Fantastic. We might move on to some of the questions that participants have submitted in advance here. One of the questions was around how you get people to come along with you on the journey, how you get them to go beyond their day job and want the change, which seems to be a recurring theme to a lot of the questions. So maybe
okay.
a bit of an insight.
So I would like everyone on this call to look up the term intrapreneurship. Okay, so I came from a corporate, and some of you were working in large organisations, government, not for NGOs, whatever else. But how do you convince people to change that? That is clearly difficult in large organisations, and that's where I've spent most of my time. So I talk about this in light of intrapreneurship, not entrepreneurship. There's real art and skill to that. But I think fundamentally it's remembering that we're all humans and that people come to work for various reasons. And I think understanding why people come to work and what they're trying to do and connecting to them on a human level enables you to then find out how to explain what you're trying to do in an organisation. So I'll give you an example. When I was looking at impact investing, we were trying to drive scale through the market. The market is full of very small social enterprises, and we could wait a long time for these social enterprises to scale, or we could just move billions of dollars. And one of the things that was not happening when I first took this role was green bonds. It was stuck in somewhere in our systems, but we got the first one off in December 2014. And now that I just looked at the numbers, the market, according to the Responsible Investment Association of Australasia, RIA, is $8.4 billion for 2018, because I took it a year ago. So in 4 years, it grew from zero to $8.4 billion which means that all these renewable wind farms and happen. So this is scale and impact. And this is why we work at large organisations, because of that ability to shift the Titanic, 1 degree and actually have that type of scale. But working in large organisations, people often don't see that. So where do you find an intersection between a bank and large-scale social impact? Obviously, green bonds is one, and there's a few other types of products like fixed income products that don't work. But the other thematic was housing, social and affordable housing, massive issue in Australia. You guys would remember, or you probably walk past people who were sleeping rough on the streets every day. And it just made sense. From a strategic perspective, there's a lot, I can go into a lot of details to why strategically it's important for the banks to think about this. It was at scale. It's something we do anyway. It made sense, right? So, that Venn diagram, it's in the sweet spot. So how do you get someone who's doing what they do to do something different in their job? And it comes down to saying, so talk to me about housing. Do you know anyone that's struggling to find housing? And I found these amazing change makers across NAB from different teams, from group economics through to credit risk, through to the mortgage team, through to the legal team, who just said stories of, my sister chose to be a nurse and she can't afford to live with the family because she doesn't earn enough. My friend's parents divorced and the mother had to move because she didn't have enough assets, so she couldn't live in the same area. And it really threw her out, and she's been really destitute since then. I mean, everyone has a story, and that was actually where it started, with trying to help people understand what I was trying to do and get them to invest more time, because it was on top of their day job, to invest in a project. And you've probably seen NAB announced a $2 billion commitment to social and affordable housing, and recently came out with a deposit for home lenders. There's more coming, but it's just taken a long time. And that's really the work of multiple people who just get it. It's just about trying to influence and get people to understand the issue. And everyone thinks about big organisations. We bash the government, we bash the big banks, but ultimately there's individuals in those organisations who are parents, who are your neighbours. You just got to get back that, we're all humans.
And we've had a question as well. What was the biggest change strategy that you've implemented? How did you do it?
Okay. Well, I think the housing one's pretty big. The one that I'm probably most proud of was the ecosystem development work that I did, where we created, so in 2014, David Cameron, the then president of the UK and also the president of the G8, launched a task force into social impact investing. And we were just on our journey. So Australia wrote a report. It was actually the G7, excluding G8 less Russia, so G7 plus Australia. So we replaced Russia. You can look up that report. It's actually really interesting on the Impact Investing Australia website. And there were 3 pillars of work that needed to be done. One of them was capacity building. And they said we needed a capacity building fund to give grants to social enterprises to help them scale up. So everyone talked a good game and said, yeah, it's a good idea, absolutely. But no one's willing to take action. And I had the opportunity to help create that fund with $1 million, which was, here's a tip to you. If anyone asks you what you do with $1 million, always have an answer ready, okay? So anyway, this happened, and we were able to help create it with people in the ecosystems. So it was co-designed, fit for purpose to scale. And eventually the money ran out that NAB had put in, and they put in $1.75 million, which is great, and enabled, 20 organisations. I mean, every dollar granted unlocked $23 for those organisations to access capital, debt or equity capital, to scale. It's a phenomenal result. And 2 budgets ago, the federal government actually committed $7 million to contribute to that fund. So it still exists. It's called the Growth Grant. And this is where impact comes about, because, as I said, that scale of what it can do for multiple social enterprises that are going to come through the pipelines over the next 5 years is phenomenal. And I guess that's probably the proudest moment, is that people in the social enterprise sector had told me what their biggest pain point was, which is access to finance. And we were able to do something about that. One element of it, admittedly, still hard for them, don't get me wrong. But, that was a really good way of being able to demonstrate that if you persist and you have a clear vision and it's collective and it's fit for purpose, it actually can hopefully drive the impact that you hope will, develop the market. So that's actually a good example of just sticking it through and being resilient.
I think there's a theme of resilience through what you're saying, which
totally.
is really, really useful advice for everybody, I think, regardless of whether they're recent graduates or not. A little bit of a more generalist question from me. If you had to think of the best piece of professional advice that anyone had ever given you, what would that be?
It was actually quite recent. I am a bit of a head thinker. I like to think. I'm a science background. I like to rationalise things and think with my head before I make any decisions. And my mentor's advice was, what does your gut think? What about your heart? And I think that's a good way of actually gauging how we go through our lives and careers, is to also balance that off with sensing where we should, decisions that we make in our lives, not just thinking with the heart. I know that sounds really crazy if you're an intellectual, but sometimes you kind of know the decisions you need to make, and we're not very good at thinking with our hearts and our guts. And I think that was the best piece of advice I had, because I made a decision that I don't regret because I followed my gut. In a head level, I wouldn't have made that decision, but on the gut level, it was the right thing to do.
Fantastic. And similarly, following the advice theme, if you were to give some advice to recent graduates who have come to Australia as international students and are looking to establish themselves here in Australia, what advice would you give to them?
Go find your tribe, get involved. It is harder for international students because of the cultural challenges we have in Australia. We're a pretty small pond. I came back from London being an Australian-born, Australian-taught, being at university here, and I got told I couldn't get a job in Australia, having done billion-dollar transactions, because I didn't have current Australian experience. Anyway, that's a mindset thing that will make it hard for you, but be strong, find people. You will, if you do the right thing and you convince people of your value, you will get where you need to go. You just have to persist. So that's probably the best bit of advice. Resilience. Again, back to resilience. So it might be a theme at the moment because I'll maybe go through that personally.
Okay, we might take a couple of questions from the rest of the audience as well. We had a question asking, what's the best way that you've seen to actually measure impact?
Oh, that's a really good one, because I think there's lots of different answers to that depending on what you're trying to measure. So measurement has to be fit for purpose. So it depends what perspective you're looking at it from. If you are in the not-for-profit sector measuring things that need to be funded through government, there's a different way of funding via funding through, say, a green bond and an institutional product where you have to aggregate it and you have to add it up so it can be a sum total, and you need to get it to like millions of dollars. And also measurement has to serve a purpose. You don't measure things just for the sake of measuring. It's an expensive thing to do and it's time consuming. And sometimes we measure things and then we hold ourselves to account on those things and we miss the wood for the trees. So it's complicated, but there's a lot of good people working on measurement at the moment. There's a lot of projects. There's the Impact Management Project, which is looking at that from a perspective of an investor, of a person who actually needs funding, and an individual, like if you're trying to invest your own superannuation or investment money into that perspective. There's different takes on all of it. And I think the only thing I'd recommend with your thinking deeply about investment is to stay on top as much as you can, but make sure whatever you're doing and measuring is fit for purpose, and challenge yourself constantly on that.
Great advice. Do you see impact investment becoming more mainstream? I think you've kind of answered this with the growth in the area anyway, but what's your longer term view there?
I might be slightly biased because I'm trying to actually drive that myself, but I did do some reading just to check the numbers. The Global Impact Investment Network, the GIN, great name, has done a market sizing, and they say it's $502 billion. In April 2019 is when the report came out, so I highly recommend you read that report. And that has grown significantly from when I was starting out, and that G8 task force happened in 2014. It's a confluence of different reasons why it will continue to grow, and it's partly due to the fact that you guys, millennials, are coming through, and millennials I speak to are very much conscious of their values in everything they do. So I think there's a generational shift that's happening. I think that we're facing into some very significant global challenges, which we cannot shy away from, things like climate change, where we won't have a choice. We actually have to address them because we will live in a very different world if we don't, which means things like moving the capital markets to be more accountable to social and environmental issues is inevitable. There's tons and tons of reasons I could probably list, but there's some macro reasons, there's some micro reasons, but I don't really see that changing, and the trajectory really is almost exponential. Like if you look at the growth of this space, it has been developing, and the more people that come into the tent, and I welcome you all, it helps grow that conversation, and everyone's choices changes, right? Think about how many ads you're now seeing about using less plastic. Plastic straws are now being phased out. plastic bags are being phased out. People are thinking about where their super sleeps at night. These are trends that are not going away. So I think it will grow based on all those reasons, plus my own personal bias.
Which is perfectly valid too. We've had a question come through from one of our participants live, tying back into the previous question about measuring impact, and specifically in the not-for-profit sector, asking whether there's a best practice framework to adopt and embed within an organisation. Do you have any particular advice to give there?
Yeah, I'm not from that space, so I'll be really upfront about that. There are some really good people doing great work in the not-for-profit land measuring, and they have done for many years. Not-for-profits have been excellent at measuring. However, I'll give you an example of homelessness. We worked on social payment or social impact bonds, where it's payment for outcomes with the government. We did one in Victoria, New South Wales and Queensland. Each of them were different. Right? There is no standard way of measuring a program at this stage. If you're in the weeds of dealing with Indigenous homelessness for young people versus homelessness for older women over 55 in Victoria in regional areas. They're just different. And I wish there was a best practice framework that is standardised. It's not. However, there are people working on it. So Swinburne University has the School for Social Impact Investment. There's the Melbourne University MAP program has Compass. They're doing some work on social enterprises. So there's different universities looking at it. There's a lot of organisations like the Impact Investment, RIA, it's institutional. At that level, not-for-profit land, Philanthropy Australia, I would recommend you have a look at Philanthropy Australia. They invest and try and connect people to best practice of measurement. It's such a hot topic. There's measurement conferences, in fact. Sanford Social Impact Review has a Measure What Matters conference, which I think is a really good resource if you're looking at measurement for the not-for-profit space.
Fantastic, thank you. I guess connected to that too, but not on the measurement side, you've talked about the different sectors, so private industry, not-for-profit. We've had a question from one of our participants asking, is there advice that you can give on applying social investing principles at a more local level? So maybe within smaller groups or local football clubs, or is there advice that you could give on a kind of a smaller scale there?
So that's called place-based investment. So you're actually looking at a smaller location-based focus. So I'd Google that to start with, place-based investment. I would look to a really interesting organisation called Tide. Look at Tide. It's an American community-based intermediary. They basically bring communities together. There's a lot of work in Oakland, California around this stuff. So SoCap. They do a lot of research into small place-based investments. If you're thinking about it yourself, in Australia, collective impact framework, there's the Shared Value Group has a collective impact, and there's organisations that are looking at frameworks for how you set up a place-based structure, which is collaborative. In terms of impact investing, though, I would hesitate to use that word because impact investment by definition requires a return on investment and intentionality. So it's measurable impact, a financial return, and it has to be intentional. I sometimes worry with community type place-based investments, we worry too much about the financial return. I think we need to work first on the impact and then worry about the finance later. So tail should not wag the dog. And that's one of the reasons I guess I moved into AI and not didn't stay in the finance sector because you can't influence as much from the end. It's easy to do it up front. So that's probably my only caveat to thinking about impact investment and in small scale. It's sometimes not about the money and trying to get a return and employ that. Start what type of impact you want and find the programs and tools that you need to actually drive that change and then worry about funding it.
Sure. Okay. We might ask one more question before we start to wrap up because we're coming up for nearly the hour now. Would you be able to give us your top 2 or 3 tips for people making it? What would be the tips that you would give for success in your particular area?
Okay. Making it. I guess that's probably each person will be different in what they define as making it. I guess my making it changed a bit. I've got kids now, so my making it is one of the things that's important to me is making sure I spend enough time with my family, and time is really valuable to me. So being able to make sure I don't lose too much time from my children and family is really part of me making it. I think in terms of career, my direction of career and hopefully what you'll find with your career is that you feel that it aligns to your purpose, whatever that is. And I keep coming back to that, like what you want to do with your life. If your career does that, that's, I guess, making it and making sure that you feel value and it's helping you achieve that goal. And I think the way we do it as well, like how you actually go about your career is really important. Like I love investing in good teams and having a lot of fun as part of the journey. It's been a long time to be working, and if we don't have a bit of fun and sometimes take some time out to sort of stop and smell the roses and enjoy the moments that we have, that would be a sad thing to do. So for me, career success is working with really good people that, you know, are aligned to the vision that I have and are driving that together. So doing it as a team, that's part of me making it. So I guess it'll be different for each of you, but I do hope that you do find your purpose, whatever that is, and somehow get your careers to and your time aligned to that.
Fantastic advice. Thank you so much, Catherine, for your time this evening. We might wrap up there unless there's anything final that you would like to say to our participants this evening. Any final words of wisdom?
Have fun.
A very good way to finish. Thank you.